Welcome. Today I want to do a quick screencast of how to orchestrate serverless functions with Camunda Cloud. Today I want to do that for Google Functions. I did that in the past already for AWS Lambdas. So you might want to check that out, but today is about Google Functions. And I'm using a relatively common example where this is a kind of a trip booking where I have different functions like for booking the hotel, for booking a rental car, for booking the flight. And these are like individual functions committing on its own. And that means I don't have kind of an overall transaction. And that's very often referred to as the Saga pattern because now I have to work differently where I basically implement that orchestration flow where I say first hotel, then car, then flight. And for example, if the flight cannot be booked, I cannot simply roll back everything. So what I do instead is I call undo or compensation functions actually to yeah to cancel the rental car or to cancel the hotel, right? That's the idea what I want to do today. So as I said, I have that in Lambda, but today I want to do Google Functions. So if I go there, you see that the first thing you have to do, you basically have to deploy these functions. They're kind of the basis of what we want to do there. So let's quickly do that. I'm using the serverless framework. So you can just go there and say, hey, serverless deploy. You could do that differently if you like. I mean, you just have to make sure you deploy a couple of functions onto your GCP account. And the functions are actually very easy. I use Node.js here, but even there you can use whatever you want. So you can book the car. Basically, what it can do is it logs out a message on the console, and that's more or less it. What it can do is you can hand over certain data attributes, basically toggles to let them throw an error to simulate a failure, right? Then you have the cancel car function, the book flight function, the cancel flight, and so on and so forth, right? So relatively simple here. So that should be quick. So it's currently deploying. So that should be finished in a second. Let's not wait for that. The next thing I want to do is I want to basically define and deploy the workflow in order to make this sequence happen. So I'm using Camunda Cloud, which is based on Zeebe in this case. I'm going for GCP. So this is, I gave a whole talk on that, for example, at the serverless conference in London recently. So you can probably watch the recording soon or check out the slides. And in order to do that, what you have to do is you have to have a Camunda Cloud account. So if I go back there, this is where I am. You might have to sign up for the currently private beta phase. So we hope to jump out of private beta soon, but at the moment you have to sign up there. Then you get that account, and then you can create a new cluster for your workflow engine, which I call GCP functions. You can call it whatever you like. That actually doesn't matter. So what it does, it creates a new workflow engine cluster in the background. You don't have to think about how that's provisioned and these kind of things. There it is. I already got an endpoint and so on and so forth. The next thing I want to do is I want to create a new basically client credentials. The client will be my GCP function. So this is it. So you get all the credentials you need later on. So that's the first step. And the next thing, which is quite interesting, so we don't want to forget about that, is we need actually, and I'm jumping forward, but I already know that we need that we need to set an environment variable for that cluster, which basically refers to the Google Functions URLs here. So whenever you deployed it, so this is what we get a real URL, right, for my functions. And this part of the URL will not be hard coded in my workflow. That's kind of environment variable. And I can set that here in my cluster where I say it's called worker variable. This is the value I'm setting, and the worker variable is called Google function base URL. So this is what I have to set, and I do that now to not forget it. no. So I close it, and now my cluster should be working. If you wanna double check, what you can do is you can check on the start page. Yeah, it said healthy. Sorry, I was too quick. Healthy. Healthy is good. So this is basically done here. What you can immediately do is you can access the oh no, sorry. You can access the so-called upgrade. That's basically the dashboard where you can see what's going on. Currently nothing, which is, I mean, makes sense for a fresh cluster. So this is it. If I go, by the way, to the Cloud Functions console, I see all the functions already deployed, right? So that was this part. Now the next thing I have to do is I basically have to define and deploy the workflow definition. What's the workflow definition? If we go back to here, there in the Zeebe folder, again, GCP, there is a workflow model, and workflows in Zeebe or Camunda Cloud are expressed in BPMN. There's a modeler. You can download that on the Camunda Cloud homepage. And then it can define that workflow like, hey, if a trip is requested, the first thing I want to do is to book a hotel. And this is now leveraging the HTTP worker, which is built in Camunda Cloud. And here you can define the URL it's actually pointing to. So it goes to Google function base URL. That's actually what we just set in the environment. And then that's the function name book hotel, right? So that's relatively straightforward. You could define input mapping like in terms of data, but for the simple example, I don't need that. And I could define the method like the HTTP method. I'm just using put here. Then I get back some results and I can decide on that. Was that successful or not? If you go on the outgoing sequence flow here, you can see there is always these success attribute. And if it's true, we go that way. If it's false, we go the other way, right? And then the next thing we do, we book the car. Same thing, Google function book car, and so on and so forth. I mean, from here, it's simply repeating, and here's now canceling the flight, canceling the car, and canceling the hotel. So it's pretty straightforward here. The whole thing, by the way, just as an information in the background, it's an XML. So you could also edit the XML if you prefer that, and you could diff it, and so on and so forth. So now we have that file, which is lying around here, and we have to deploy that onto our workflow engine. And the easiest thing to do that is we go to Zeebe and we use the GCP version. We have a command line interface for Camunda Cloud for Zeebe, which is called CBCTL. And then you have to use the credentials of, so I'm basically copying that here. I'm a bit lazy, to be honest. So I'm doing that here, CBCTL. And then you have to copy the credentials from the Camunda Cloud. So this is here. So we have the client ID. Let's start with that. So the address, we have to set the client ID. We have a client secret. Let's copy that. There we go. We have the endpoint, which is this one. So we set this, and that should actually do the trick. And then we deploy, and that's the trip booking BPMN. Let's quickly check trip booking BPMN. That's the right name. So let's use this and just execute it. Right. So this deploys the workflow into the workflow engine. So if we go back and go to the operate dashboard, we should see that there is now a trip booking workflow deployed, which looks surprisingly similar to what I just had. So this is there. So the next thing we do is we have to basically create and deploy a function for the whole trip booking, which then kicks off that orchestration workflow. And let's quickly look at that. So there's a function in the same folder. If I look at that, it's relatively easy. So it's again Node.js. So we use the Node client for Zeebe. You could use different languages if you like. And then I have the book trip function, which basically uses the Zeebe client to connect to my cloud instance. Normally, I would have all these credentials also passed via the environment. That would be actually the clean way of doing it. I decided for the fast way of doing it in that sample now, because otherwise I would have run out of time for the recording, and I actually I found the recording more interesting than moving these bits into the environment, which is quite a typical thing to do anyway. So I copied that. So now this function can access the Camunda Cloud or Zeebe in the Camunda Cloud. Then what I do is I create a workflow instance of the trip booking workflow. If I go back to my model, this has the ID of trip booking, so I can start it here. Okay, I log a couple of things, and that's basically it, right? So this function again is relatively straightforward. What I do next is actually I deploy that. I use again serverless framework to do that. Now this package basically the JavaScript file, and that's probably the only interesting thing to point out while it's deploying. I have a package JSON to organize the dependencies, and that the important thing is we need the Zeebe node client, and as Zeebe uses gRPC for communication, you need also to make sure. Actually, this shouldn't be necessary for Google functions, but I wanted to double check to make sure that this is working on a Linux machine as well. But it actually should be necessary. So probably not even worth to point that out. So what it does in the background, it deploys that, uploads that, and then I should have my function. And if I go back to my small little tutorial, that's all written down here. What I do is this one. And then I can access that function. We might have to wait for my endpoint. Let's wait for that. And then I go to, oh yeah, something handy here. To my bash in order to do a curl. Hang on, I have to go to the right directory. Development, flowing, trap booking saga. There we are. Then I go to my Zeebe workflow GCP version. Right. So, and then I do a curl, send out a request. Let's look at the request, what the request. That's a very simple one. You will get the idea when I show you that. So it basically contains the attributes in order to toggle the failure simulation. So book hotel failure, no. Let's make the happy path first. So let's go there. So everything should actually work. Let's check if serverless deployed. It didn't. And I think I know why. Let's quickly remove it first. Because I played around with GCP quite a bit, and I deleted a couple of functions manually, which normally means I have leftovers especially in the serverless framework, and it doesn't really work well with that. So I should definitely remove it using the serverless framework if I also use serverless to deploy it. And as soon as it's removed, I kick off the deployment again. And in order to speed up the recording, I will pause until the deployment works. Okay, see you in a second. Okay, we're back in the game. So it's currently deploying. Probably I was a bit too quick to resume the recording because we still have to wait a bit. Sorry for that. And not much I want to tell you at that moment. So we just wait for it to happen, and then we could kick it off. One thing probably to point out while we're waiting, this architecture I used here, where I basically call the functions via HTTP via the gateway, is not the only way I could use it. So I recently blogged about that, about the Camunda Cloud and different use cases. And if you go to that article, there is, okay, why is cloud interesting? What is Camunda Cloud? Then there's one use case which is often used, microservice orchestration, which is not for today's recording. But the second one is serverless function orchestration. And here I'm basically showing two different architecture possibilities. And one is exactly what we are doing today. So we have the trip booking function, we have the workflow deployed on Zeebe and Camunda Cloud, and then we have like the function kicking off a workflow instance and workflow using the HTTP worker calling your functions via HTTP. The alternative would be actually to have your own small little worker. That's possible. So you can basically subscribe to Zeebe and say, hey, whenever something for my function is happening, let me know. And then you can invoke the functions natively if you prefer that. Then you have some component on your side running in Google Cloud. And that is a different approach. Then you don't have to open all the functions via HTTP. Security might be a bit easier or at least different. You have to keep an eye on what you have to pay for. So in this case, you don't have to pay for HTTP. On the other hand, normally this gets kind of an always-on component. So you have to scale it yourself. So you have to really manage that component. On the other hand, you have full control over it. So there are a couple of trade-offs and why you're going to want to go this way or the other. But I decided to go this way because that's what I'm seeing most people currently doing, actually. So I decided to record that one. So in the meanwhile, we deployed our trip booking function. I talked for long enough, and now we can curl it so we can give it a go. As soon as I do that, I get back an arrow. Why do I get back an arrow? The requested URL was not found on the server. That's pretty weird. Why is that? The undefined doesn't look too good, right? Let's quickly check. So here it is. Go faster. Hang on. Here's a trigger. Yeah, the undefined is actually wrong. That should something I should have spotted earlier, right? But anyway, let's do it again. And I mean, this is kind of an error which we also had in the URLs for all the other functions. So what I do is I update the worker variable here, which basically means I'm going here. Let's see if that's working. Here, delete the old one. Ah, didn't work. Too bad. Anyway, let's copy it again. There we go. There we go. There we go. Remove the function name. That's the function URL. Right. That should be it. There we go. And give it another go, I guess. Yeah, looks better, I think. There we go. Takes a bit longer. Probably the first time it has to start up. Normally it's relatively quick. Oh, that's actually pretty bad. Let's check. Let's look into the logs. What's happening here? Unauthorized. No. Right. Right. No. Weird. Let's quickly think. So that's basically it's from Zeebe already. So it starts to call the other functions. So the other function. So the workflow is kicked off. Do we have anything running? No, it's not kicked off. It can't kick it off, actually. It can't kick it off. That's a problem here. Because it's not authorized to get a token, which normally is related to these credentials. Let's quickly check if we did something wrong here. So the cluster ID. Now let's double check. Cluster ID is this. Cluster ID is this. The Zeebe contact point. No, the client ID is this. Client. Oh yeah, there we have the error. Right. That makes a lot of sense actually. If we paste the wrong things here, it doesn't work. So it's kind of secure. Ah, hooray. So redeployed. As I said, probably we should move it to the environment configuration. And in order to save a bit of time in the recording, I pause it until it's deployed. See you in a second. Okay, there we go. It's deployed. And that means we can trigger it again and see how that goes. Much better, right? Trip booking started. So that means if we go back to operate, what we should see here is actually a completed instance, right? It was the happy case. So if you look into it, we can also see that like this was the path it took, right? So obviously happy case, great. Okay, so this is working, and I mean, we could also see that the functions are called, but don't want to go down that route too much. Probably we say book whatever, book hotel. Let's quickly look at these logs, and then we should see something there, just to prove everything is working. Sooner or later, you can do that via command line as well, but it's a little bit quicker than. Yeah, we booked a hotel. Awesome. Great. Next thing, what we can do is we can go to our request and say, hey, the flight booking has a problem. So I saved this file, and that means now I'm using that here as a request JSON. So this is now passed on basically as data of the workflow in order to simulate a problem. So the trip booking was started. If I go back to operate, refresh it here, what I will see is that I have another instance which actually I didn't even reach the trip booking failed because it has a problem in the cancel booking. Why is that? Another problem. So today is a day of problems, but in this case, I mean, it's even nice and handy because then I can show you capabilities here of the tooling. So we can see something went wrong here. We can see the problem. So it looks like it didn't found the function. Right, there is obviously a slash missing. Probably that's in the thing here. Cancel hotel is not found. That's actually pretty weird. Let's quickly look at, is cancel hotel a function? Is cancel hotel a function? Cancel hotel is a function, so that should work. Let's look at the workflow. Cancel hotel headers. Right, I think there is. Right, there is the slash missing. Too bad. I'm not sure when I messed that up. I did a test run before the recording, so that's that. But I can show you another thing, which is pretty handy to show. I redeploy the workflow. What you can see is now you have versioning. So now I have a new version where you can even see that here. So if I go back to, for example, running instances, I can say, hey, trip booking, show me all in version 1, for example, right? These are, if I also add the finished ones, these are the 2 I have. In version 2, I don't have yet things running, but if I kick off a new version, a new workflow now, this runs in the new version, which is version 2. So if I refresh here, I should actually see something going on. Here we are. And this time it worked. So it went through all the way till that. So you see it booked the flight and then it canceled this stuff again, right? So that's working. What we don't yet have in Camunda Cloud, but we have that in other tools, and it's in the roadmap, is that now you could also migrate these like the failing version to the newest version, and then you could retry it, and then it will work. So you can fix these kind of errors also, and can upgrade running instances. For the moment, I can't really do much here. I would probably cancel it, and you can look at the payload and restart a new instance. That's kind of the workaround what it can do at the moment, right? Um, but what you can definitely do, and that's interesting to talk about also, like you could retry it. I mean, it doesn't help here because it will still fail because the failure was really coded in there. But if, for example, the function is not available, it's redeployed, it has a downtime or whatever, you can easily retry things. You can even do that in a bulk way, so you can filter for things, then really run that for all of these. So there are a lot of like operation capabilities for workflows built in. So that was basically it. I hope that gave you an impression how you can orchestrate Google Functions with Camunda Cloud. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. Give it a go. Thank you for listening. See you around. Bye bye.